The year 2025 has been the time that Ukraine focused hard on destroying as much of Russia's oil infrastructure as it possibly could using its long-range strikes. There is a very good reason for this strategy. The more of this infrastructure that falls apart, the less oil Russia has to give to its soldiers, its people, and its war budget. Oil is the final thing that is keeping Russia going. In just one night, Ukraine destroyed even more of the oil gear that Vladimir Putin and his friends in the Kremlin need to support the failing invasion of Ukraine. There are fires burning across Russia because Ukraine's drones have hit oil targets again. During the night between December 13 and December 14, Ukraine sent a large group of drones to strike Russia. These attacks caused explosions and fires at some of the country's most vital oil and energy sites. Air raid sirens screamed, local officials panicked. Once again, Ukraine proved to the Russian people that their president has invited a war into their home and that he cannot stop Ukraine from destroying targets. These targets do not just help Russia's military, but they are also important for the daily lives that normal Russians lead. Ukraine hit facilities all across Russia during its smart nighttime raid. In Uryupinsk, which is located in the Volgograd region, an oil depot caught fire. Russian oil refineries were targeted again, with production sites in Krasnodar Krai and Yaroslavl being the newest victims of Ukraine's damaging drones. Also, in the Smolensk region, Ukraine showed Putin that too can play the energy strike game. Its drones scored direct hits on a thermal power plant that provides power to people in that region. If a target helps Russia's war effort, it is now fair game for Ukraine to hit, and Ukraine hunted a lot of that game on December 13 and December 14. Newsky released a report on Ukraine's strikes, beginning with the attack on the oil depot in Uryupinsk. The news outlet reveals that Russian sources say Ukraine's drones entered the Volgograd region at around 0:45 Kiev time, and they soon started causing trouble. Explosions were heard all over the city, followed by tall pillars of fire rising from a now ruined oil depot. UNN also reported on this attack, noting that these are part of the Ukrainian military's continued efforts to weaken the Russian war machine by removing oil supplies. This weakening happens in a few ways. Most directly, Russian oil that burns up is oil that cannot be sent to the front lines in Ukraine. When Russia loses the fuel its military needs, it launches fewer vehicle attacks because its tanks cannot go anywhere. That is perfect for Ukraine's defenders. They can then focus their drones and weapons on Russian soldiers who are forced into foot attacks. In these attacks, soldiers blindly move forward while hoping desperately that Ukraine does not catch them doing it. However, in a bigger sense, destroying Russian oil also means Russia loses a valuable product it can no longer sell to customers. That has a huge economic effect on both the country and the army. We will look at that topic more later in this video. Going back to the Uryupinsk strike, it was bad enough that even Russian officials, who usually try to ignore Ukraine's long-range success, had to say something. Newsky says that Andriy Bokarov, the governor of Volgograd Oblast, which includes Uryupinsk, had to publicly confirm Ukraine's strike. However, he used an old excuse that we have heard again and again during the war. Bokarov claimed Ukraine's drones had not hit the target directly. The fire at the oil depot was caused by falling debris from a drone, the regional governor said. It is amazing how accurate Ukraine's drone debris seems to be. If we did not know better, we might think Ukraine has somehow put GPS guidance into the trash that Russia claims falls on its oil sites. Of course, we do know the truth. Debris has nothing to do with the fire at Uryupinsk. Instead, Ukraine's drones scored direct hits at a depot that holds 18 tanks. These tanks regularly receive and store fuel sent to Uryupinsk from oil refineries. This fuel seems to be used to serve the city's people, meaning Russia will now have to move fuel from other places to stop shortages in Uryupinsk. Speaking about fuel, Ukraine did not stop at oil depots on the night of December 13 into December 14. Russia's refineries were on the Ukrainian target list again, and 2 of them were hit with drones during Ukraine's overnight attack. Again, Newski has the basic facts. It reports that Russian media is talking about attacks on oil refineries in Krasnodar Krai and Yaroslavl. The strike in the second territory might be the most important of the two. Ukraine's drones landed in the Slavneft Yanos refinery, which the outlet says is one of the biggest oil refineries in all of Russia. Local residents reported explosions at both refineries. However, officials would only talk about small fires and downed drones, as if those drones had not just destroyed more infrastructure at some of Russia's most key oil refining sites. Regarding the refinery in Krasnodar Krai, Ukraine hit the Afipsky facility. This place has been a regular target for Ukraine since the summer. Energy News Beat says this newest strike is the sixth one Ukraine has done since July. The Afipsky facility has seen a drop in output of between 20% and 30% because of this. That is the whole point of Ukraine's refinery strikes. The less fuel these refineries can make, the less gasoline, diesel, and plain fuel Russia has to send to its soldiers or sell to other nations. While Russia spoke about the successful work of air defenses, in the Krasnodar Krai region, residents reported loud explosions, broken windows, and strong shaking. All of this points to powerful explosions that did not happen in the sky. Ukraine's drones were hitting their targets. The Afipsky refinery has proven itself just as weak to Ukraine's strikes in December as it was during the summer. But that is a statement you could make about any Russian oil refinery. The Kremlin simply cannot seem to stop Ukraine from hitting these valuable pieces of infrastructure. On November 1, the Kyiv Independent pointed out just how strong Ukraine's targeting of Russian oil has become. From January through October, Ukraine had done 160 strikes against Russian oil refining and extraction, according to Vasyl Maliuk, the head of the country's security service. At least 20 of these strikes happened during September and October. Ukraine's drones hit targets including a pair of oil terminals, 3 fuel depots, and 9 pumping stations. 6 of Russia's oil refineries were also hit. These are valid military targets. Oil extraction and refining make up around 90% of Russia's defense budget. These are the dirty oil rubles funding the war against us, Maliuk said. His comments again touch on the huge economic results of Ukraine's decision to target Russia's oil sector. Ukraine did not slow down its strike rate in November. In fact, it was the opposite. Russia's refineries became an even bigger target for Ukraine's drones during that month. Whatever weak air defenses these refineries have, assuming they have defenses at all, failed totally. Ukraine managed to pull off at least 14 strikes against Russian refineries. The Moscow Times reports that this strike rate, which is almost 1 refinery attack every 2 days, was a new monthly record for Ukraine as it stepped up efforts to destroy Russia's oil lifeline. The Afipsky plant that Ukraine hit during its December 13 and December 14 strikes was also hit in November. The Moscow Times also reveals that this facility has a yearly capacity of 1 million tons, making it one of Russia's largest refineries. This constant campaign of refinery strikes is working, as the outlet reports. Russia's average daily refining volume has dropped to around 5 million barrels per day as a result of the increased campaign, down from the 3 to 5 million barrels per day usually processed in late autumn, the Moscow Times says. There are a few weeks left before we learn if Ukraine has had a record-breaking refinery run in December. But with 2 successful strikes in one night, it seems Ukraine has no plan to slow down anytime soon. More Russian energy targets were on Ukraine's list in December, as Smolensk also had to deal with Ukraine's drones. We say deal, more accurately a thermal plant in Smolensk was hit hard on December 11. This shows that Ukraine is playing a back and forth game with Russia on the energy infrastructure front. Newski has some details, noting that the Russian Defense Ministry once again claimed the drones Ukraine sent were shot down. However, those drones also managed to cause fires. Debris must be doing damage again. Russia has complained about attacks like the one in Smolensk, calling them terroristic. This can only be described as unfair criticism of Ukraine at a time when Russia is doing strikes just like these on Ukraine's land. Newsky highlights this. It states that Ukraine's attacks on Russia's energy infrastructure, which can stop Russian citizens from having electricity and heating, are only happening because Russia is doing these very types of strikes against Ukraine. The Kremlin has long used winter electricity and heat as weapons, and now Russian regions are increasingly feeling such weakness, Newsky says. It adds that Ukraine rarely confirms or denies it is involved in strikes against Russia's energy sector. December 13 and December 14 are no different. Ukraine has not claimed responsibility for the Smolensk strike, though it is clear who was behind it. Having said that, UNN reports that the Smolensk thermal power plant has far more military uses than civilian ones. Despite Russia's anger at what it calls a terrorist attack, Smolensk's plant is a valid military target because it allows chemical production plants to run. These plants serve Russia's defense industry, the outlet says. Without this plant, Russian facilities will not be able to produce as much nitrates, ammonia, and nitrogen fertilizers. All of these are building blocks for the explosives used in many of Russia's missiles and bombs. Even if that was not the case, Ukraine would still feel right in targeting a thermal power plant that serves Russia's people. As we have pointed out, much of Russia's winter strategy, in 2025 and years before, depends on stopping as many Ukrainian citizens from having power as possible. It is also a strategy that works. December 13 saw the BBC report that around 1 million Ukrainian homes had been left without electricity after a group of overnight strikes. This followed several months of similar strikes that have caused blackouts and heating outages. By targeting thermal power plants, Russia is actively trying to freeze out Ukrainian citizens. This goes against the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 25, which states that every person has rights to a good standard of living. The University of Alabama at Birmingham points out, Russia is trying to take away this right from Ukraine's citizens. Ukraine is now doing the same to Russia's people. As a result, strikes like those in Smolensk sit in a complicated moral spot. Many will claim that Ukraine is just giving Russia a large dose of the terrible medicine that Putin has forced down Ukraine's throat every winter since he started his invasion. Ukraine could also support its attack on the Smolensk thermal power plant by pointing out how that plant serves Russia's military industry. Even so, Ukraine is technically breaking the same rules as Russia with attacks like these, which is why it rarely claims responsibility. Though this series of strikes against Russian oil and energy naturally grabs headlines because they are part of Ukraine's big strategy to cut Russia's oil lifeline, they were far from the only strikes Ukraine pulled off in a tough few days for Russia. Ukraine's own general staff highlighted this in a December 14 Facebook post. It pointed out that Ukraine had also taken the chance to strike several facilities in the Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine. In Zaporizhzhia, Ukraine destroyed a building used by Russia's drone operators, in addition to taking out a missile complex needed for a Tor M2 air defense system to work. In the occupied Donetsk region, a pair of control points used by Russia's 76th Air Assault Division were destroyed, along with a radio location station and a pair of electronic warfare stations. Crimea, which has so often been the target of Ukraine's drones and missiles, also did not get away. In addition, at the temporarily occupied territory of Ukrainian Crimea, our soldiers struck 2 fuel bases, the radio station Kasta 2E2 and the valuable element for air defense systems C-300 to C-400, the radio station 96L6E, the Ukrainian General Staff reports. And that still does not cover everything. The Kyiv Independent adds that Russia claimed to have shot down 41 Ukrainian drones over Crimea on the same night as the oil depot and refinery strikes. That might be true, but drones still appear to have struck another oil depot, this one located in the Simferopol region of Crimea. Veliky Novgorod was also targeted, as Ukraine hit the Akron chemical plant in that region with drones. This caused smoke to rise from the facility, the same outlet reports. Russia must have wondered what hit it. Far from being weakened to the point of giving up by Russia's winter campaign, Ukraine is coming out fighting with drone strikes on a huge scale that further weaken Russia's military power. Not that you would know that if you listened to Russia. We have already revealed that Russia used the old drone debris excuse for several of Ukraine's successful strikes. We also told you that Russia is pretending that everything is fine in Crimea and that all of Ukraine's drones were shot down. Newski adds that December 14 saw Russia create its own version of events. In this version, it destroyed 141 of Ukraine's drones in the skies of Volgograd, Smolensk, Yaroslavl, and Krasnodar Krai. However, this reporting is proven wrong by the fires and explosions caused by Ukraine's drones. It is also contradicted by a different view of the night's events being offered by some parts of the Russian media. Russian pro-government media are trying to present the events as an episode of a massive terrorist attack by Kyiv, without answering the question of why. After 2 years of full-scale war, key refineries and oil depots remain weak to drones hundreds of kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Newski reports. Russia is trying to have it both ways. Ukraine definitely did not hit Russia, except when it did. And those strikes were done by a terroristic regime, not a smart military force that knows exactly how to hit Russia where it hurts. The Kremlin story continues to break apart, and it will eventually fall apart completely as Ukraine carries out more of these long-range attacks. Strikes like these are among the most powerful that Ukraine can carry out for several reasons. The first of those reasons is something we highlighted earlier in the video. Each time Ukraine hits Russian oil or energy, the economic and military impacts echo throughout Russia. The Bloomsbury Intelligence and Security Institute highlighted this fact in a November 11 piece. It revealed that Ukraine has targeted roughly 55% of Russia's oil refineries since the beginning of the war. Those attacks have grown more intense and successful in 2025. The year has seen Ukraine carry out 48% more successful refinery strikes than it did in 2024. This resulted in about 20% of Russia's total refining capacity being dismantled. The impact on Russia's budget is clear when you realize that about 30% of that budget came from the taxes Russia charges on oil and gas sales in 2024. The math is really simple here. More Ukrainian refinery strikes plus less oil being refined equals a massive hole being burned in the Russian bank account. Radio Free Europe Radio Liberty staff also wrote a piece for oilprice.com on November 29 that offered more interesting numbers. That piece claims Russia's refining capacity was cut by 10% rather than 20%, though that is still an amazing number. The article adds that fossil fuels bring about $100 billion per year to Russia, though even that number is 20% lower than it was in 2024. Inside Russia, gasoline limits and shortages have become common. Plus, there is the obvious issue that comes up when fuel goes up in flames money, and fuel are needed to keep a war going, and Russia is slowly being drained of both by Ukraine. Ukraine also gains as Russia loses thanks to these types of strikes. How? Ukraine gains power, at least according to a December 4 Forbes article written by Vikram Mittal. The Forbes writer notes Ukraine's strikes against Russian oil, in addition to the many times Ukraine destroyed Russian military equipment, factories, and other war-related infrastructure with its drones and missiles. On the near term, these long-range drone strikes will have significant meanings for the ongoing peace talks, Mittal writes. By demonstrating the ability to hit key targets deep inside Russia, Ukraine shows that it can continue causing meaningful damage if the war continues. In other words, Ukraine's drones punch holes in the story of a sure Russian victory that the Kremlin wants to spread. The fact that they are happening at all, let alone at the huge scale we now see, tells anybody who is paying attention that Ukraine is a long way from being out of the fight. Add the economic damage we have already discussed, and Ukraine can make the case that all it needs to do is keep hitting Russia with its drones, and the country will eventually run out of money. Putin would be forced to end his invasion in that situation. That possibility alone offers Ukraine far more power at the negotiating table than many give it credit for having. What Ukraine is proving time and time again is that Russia's deep rear areas are not only no longer safe, but they practically no longer exist. Ukraine can hit targets hundreds of miles inside Russia, and it is doing so often enough to show that Russia's military is stretched too thin. Oil refineries and similar facilities should have perfect air defenses, especially now that it is clear how focused Ukraine is on targeting them. Yet, Putin does not send air defenses to these facilities. That is because Russia's air defenses are needed inside Ukraine. This leaves most of the deep rear areas that Putin assumed would be safe exposed. Russia could move more air defenses to these facilities, though that would equal the direct weakening of the defenses protecting its soldiers inside Ukraine. Or Russia keeps doing what it is doing, accepting that Ukraine is going to hit its refineries, depots, and practically any other targets of its choosing in Russia and occupied Ukraine. Either choice is a win for Ukraine, and that is a problem for which Putin has no solution. If all of these strikes against oil and thermal energy were not enough, Ukraine has also expanded its attacks to include Russia's liquid natural gas. We saw that earlier in December when Ukraine struck at a key gas port that Russia uses to export one of its fossil fuels to other countries. Find out more about that strike and what it means for Russia's economic lifeline in our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's many drone strikes inside Russia.